Recently, Graham and I had the chance to sit down with one of the most entertaining pros in pickleball. Zane has his own podcast, is one of the most decorated pros in MLP, and is never scared to share his opinion. We talked about his rise to the pro scene, his perspective on some of the most controversial rules in pickleball.
Probably the worst rule in competitive sports. Current serve rules are not enforceable whatsoever. We can't actually have a real conversation about getting rid of it when you have the premise completely incorrect.
And his thoughts on how power is affecting the game.
I think that the best way to regulate the game is through the ball.
And with that intro out of the way, I hope you all enjoy our interview with Zane Navratil. Going into this next year, we know we've seen some changes, but from your perspective with MLP, what do you think needs to change going forward for it to have success?
Look, I have so much fun with Major League Pickleball, and I think a big part of the challenge and part of the thing that I enjoy is trying to figure out how to win and gel and be a good team with different people every time, right? Like, it's relatively easy to go out and play well, or you know what to expect when you have a regular partner. I like the challenge of trying to get the most out of other people that you might not know. And everybody's sort of in the same boat, right? So, I think just figuring out people's communication styles. A good example of this is when I was on BLQK, we had myself, Paris Todd, Rafa Hewitt, and Irina Terashenko. Me, Rafa, and Paris, we did great when it was loud, rowdy, we were yelling, having fun. Irina just wants to chill. So when Irina's out there, we're chill. When it's me, Paris, or Rafa, we're rowdy. I think that's a fun part of MLP is just figuring out how to get the best out of your entire team, even when you're not playing.
I definitely agree with that. I know one of the things I like to credit myself with, not that I am a great player at all. I mean, I'm barely a 4-5, but that adaptability with being able to play with other people, that's one thing you see obviously with MLP versus the PPA where, you have your set partners and maybe you're changing week after week, but you get a lot more practice in there. Versus MLP, I mean, you're having to change on the spot your partners during the event. So I think that's a really cool perspective. That's something that I've really enjoyed about MLP in the past.
Yeah, you get to see different matchups, different people. And I think it levels the playing field because you don't have the number one guy playing with the number two guy or you don't have Anna Lee and Catherine playing together. You have Anna Lee playing with Mari and they were still dominant. But there's not as much disparity from top to bottom because of the way the draft works. So that's a cool part of it as well.
So moving on to the second question. So they announced this week they're moving back to traditional scoring. You've been very outspoken about how you like rally scoring. How do you think adjusting back to that, and then also the adjustment of going from PPA to MLP back and forth, how does that work as a pro?
Well, I mean, Samin left the door open on our podcast for potentially returning back to rally scoring at some point. I understood his justifications for the change. I think rally scoring could have certainly been saved with a little bit of effort, and I'd been critical of certain parts of rally scoring, like the freeze, like the inability to stack. I think those both take out a good amount of strategy. But in terms of switching from rally scoring to traditional scoring, if you're a player that is playing any differently from rally scoring to traditional scoring, you've basically bought into the idea that there is a difference and you should be doing something different. Somebody explained to me how you should play strategically different. The way that I see it and the way that it should be played is whether you're playing traditional scoring or whether you're playing rally scoring, just because a point goes on the scoreboard after you miss a third shot in rally scoring doesn't mean you should be changing your strategy. In theory, that is you've lost an opportunity to score in a traditional scoring match, and that should be treated exactly equally. People talk about the difference in strategy between traditional scoring and rally scoring. If you're talking about a difference in strategy between the two, you're already doing it wrong. Yeah, it actually just doesn't change the dynamic of how to play that match. So, there's slight nuances in how much risk you should take in serve and third and return, but once the point is neutralized at the kitchen, there's no difference in how you should play between the two of them.
Yeah, because I know that was one of the main adjustments, as you had kind of mentioned, with the serve not being able to lose on a serve, because I know that obviously had a bunch of pushback at the beginning of this year, which obviously was eventually quickly changed. That was something I actually had issues with as well, because I feel like that kind of takes out of some of that aggression you might have at the end of where you want to, hit the ball a little bit harder on a serve, play a bit more aggressive, not knowing you might lose, but the fact that, like I said, you still get the ball to the other end, and like I said, they ended up changing that, I think was, like I said, a good correction.
Yeah, it's
You were-
limiting a barrier to entry. But
You were against the freeze, though, weren't you?
so here's the thing with the freeze. The freeze is probably the worst rule in competitive sports from a competition element. I can't imagine. Do you know any other sport where only one team can score at the end of a match? I don't. Sameen, whether it was Sameen, whether it was me, it's like in the basketball, all right, the team that's ahead can only score points with 3-pointers or something. It was a uniquely bad rule from a competitive standpoint.
Yeah.
When you look at what the league needed, you could say that it was a good rule because you have to weigh the different stakeholders, right? Okay, the athletes say this is a bad rule because it was a bad rule. The viewers probably loved it because it did make matches artificially closer. So what's more important at this stage? I argued that, yeah, it's a horrible rule from a competitive standpoint, but from a viewership standpoint, it might have been just what pickleball needed. Well, don't we want more close matches? Isn't that going to be something that's going to draw more people to want to watch instead of blowouts? And I think that what the fans wanted in that case, I think, outweighed what the players wanted. And so for that reason, I would say I was in favor of the freeze, but it doesn't make it a not horrible rule.
The two pushbacks I'd have on that were, obviously in most sports, you have to be on offense to score. So obviously, like I said, the defense winning a match while on defense, a little bit odd, I think, like I said, to be scoring while on defense. Like I said, that's traditionally not something we often see. But the other thing with that, in terms of bringing matches closer, I would argue, like I said, having to be able to be more aggressive while you're down. Like I said, knowing that freeze is there could incentivize you to be more aggressive. Like I said, once you're on that, like say they're at the 24 or whatever, if you're serving, you can be more aggressive, go for more balls versus having to be a little bit more tighter if you're down 5 or 6 or so on.
I mean, I feel like that goes both ways. I feel like that's just how the match is playing out. Like if you're down because you've been playing too passive, maybe you change and play more aggressively. Or if you're up because you're playing, aggressively, you continue to play aggressively. I feel like the decision of whether to play aggressively or more passively comes down to match flow and what's been working more so than score. Just because I'm up on match point doesn't mean I'm going to play more aggressively if what's been working has been grinding them out and only dinking, right? So when you get to that position of serving at 24-20, again, it might factor into some people's decision making, all right, I've got match point, I want to play more aggressively. But really what you should be doing is the exact same thing that's gotten you a 4-point lead, right?
Yeah.
You should not deviate from that, because if it's 24-20, that means you've won whatever that is, 54% of points. You're statistically more likely to win the point than not, probably. You don't want to deviate from that strategy.
I think my perspective where I'm coming out with that is I'm going for the team that's at 20. If you're at 20-24, if you serve that ball into the net, the other team would win, correct?
That was for the one event. That happened
Okay.
for one event in Atlanta, and they fixed that immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if you're down and wanting to play aggressive, yeah, I get that. You're definitely going to tighten up on that serve for sure.
Going into this next year, what do you think is the biggest factor for pickleball to continue to grow?
Oh, interesting. I mean, I think something really big is we've got to capitalize on all the people that are playing and draw them into watching, right? And so something that I've found super interesting, and I discussed with Sameen on our recent podcast, is the YouTube numbers, I think, are really good. You go through the PPA's YouTube channel, and these matches are 80K, 100K, 40K, 70K, but it's still the same 5,000 people when it's live on YouTube, right? It's over the few years that I've been watching PPA, it's been 5,000 that whole time for some reason. It used to be in post, there'd be 15,000 people who watched a match. Somehow figuring out how to create some sort of sense of urgency to watch this live. People are watching. I think that's something that people are getting wrong. Just because the live stream numbers are bad, we're in a spot where the live views don't matter as much as they used to, right? Live views used to be the only thing that mattered when live views were the only thing that you could have, right? Now it's people are watching. Do we care that much if they watch it while it's live or if they watch it afterwards? So, I think just getting more people to watch, whether it's live or in post, is important. And I think as people funnel in pickleball, you're more likely to do it as well. So I think we're going to see that. I think it was 2023 where we had that metric of 50 million people played pickleball in the United States. Some of them are going to fall off. Some of them are going to continue to be those like hardcore players. I don't think people who are watching are not watching anymore. I think we're still drawing in new people. And I think a lot of it is going to come from local engagement stuff. Something that I was really excited about with Major League Pickleball was having teams in local markets that people can interact with. You go to an MLP event, and meet a few of the players, you're probably 10x more likely to go watch a match afterwards.
Yeah.
So for the pro game to continue to grow, I think it is like involving the communities more.
And this is something I think also we'll get into a little bit more in a future question, but that's one of the things with MLP this next year. Like I said, having those events in those local markets is going to be absolutely huge. One thing, I went to the Kansas City MLP this last year, and not fantastic attendance compared to the PPA, and same kind of
1,000 degrees too.
Yeah, exactly.
Why do you feel like you've had so much success in MLP?
I think I've been really fortunate to be drafted to like teams that were good to begin with, or championship contenders. I would say I've always been on a team where the ownership group has been supportive, and that goes a very, very long way. There are certain ownership groups that don't show up to the events and don't care. I've had teammates that have always cared as well, which again isn't always the case. So I think if you have an ownership group that wants it and a team that wants it, like that's almost guaranteed to be a playoff team. And then from there, I think that learning how to like work with different players and different personalities is a skill set of mine, and being a good hype guy. I've always just been like really riled up by team stuff. College tennis, even though tennis is kind of an individual sport, I just loved, being the captain of the tennis team at Wisconsin Whitewater for a couple of years. And maybe my excitement for those is infectious to the teammates too. Got to give them credit too. I've been you're on Annalie Waters' team. If we don't do, we'd be asking some very difficult questions if we didn't do well.
Yeah. And that's one thing I'll say also with the fives this year, obviously, if just channeling that energy. I mean, that your team was the only team that was it's really interacting with the crowd constantly, and I mean, it showed. There was a bunch of people wearing the clown noses, and they were everywhere. It was kind of cool to see, like I said, that engagement.
Yeah, well, that's on my mom. My mom passes out the clown noses and stuff too. So she was the one who bought the clown noses. Shout out to Dimple.
If you could build perfect MLP team, but it can't be one of your previous 4 title teams, who would be on it?
Interesting. So I'm
you're
going
on
to answer
it.
this.
You have to be on it as well.
I have to be on it. I'm going to answer this more of like who the players that are built for MLP rather than the players that are just the best, right? The easy answer would be like Annalie, Catherine, Ben,
Yep.
right? That'd be the easy answer. So I'm going to answer this of like who are like just MLP all-stars, right? Players that might perform better at MLP versus PPA. I'd put myself in that category, right? My best results recently have been in MLP. I got to pick some of my teammates from before. Come on, I got to.
That's fine. It just can't be the same team.
Same team.
All right, I'd pick
Specifically the Orlando Squeeze.
Yeah, I'd pick Rachel Rohrabacher from the Orlando Squeeze. Played with BC. Like she's a firecracker. Always fired up. Depending on who you ask, the most annoying scream in pickleball or the best scream in pickleball. I'm on the side of I love that she's riled up. So I'd go with Rachel. Other female, I think just the energy of Elise is awesome. She's out there diving. She's like a great pump up person. Never a down moment with Elise. And then on the guys' side, to be my partner, I would say Andre to sort of mellow things out a little bit. That'd be a little bit too Orlando Squeeze.
He goes, put Anna Bright on there.
So I won't pick Andre. We'll give it a Rafa. Just another loud, energetic dude.
Definitely.
Yeah. You've been playing pro pickleball for 5 years. I looked that up. It said 2020, 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, you started playing pro pickleball. Take us through how the sport has grown in those 5 years, and then give your projection of what the next 5 years you see coming from.
Yeah. So if pro pickleball existed, I would say I've was probably at a pro level since like 2014. I started in 2013. 2014, I started playing with a a little bit. I was playing college tennis at UW Whitewater then, so I was like dabbling, but I was like, pretty competitive with Dave Weinbach, who was in Madison, who was one of the top guys at that point.
Yeah.
So I've seen the game from 2014 onwards, really. And at that point, when I would tell people that I play pickleball, funny story was like, between my sophomore and junior year playing tennis, I did not pick up a tennis racket the entire summer. And my coach knew that like I played pickleball a little bit. He was always like, pickleball is going to screw up your tennis game, all that stuff. I come back my junior year and I'm playing like sick doubles. I'm like volleying great. I'm like poaching on everything. And my coach is like, Zane, you worked on your doubles game so much this summer. Like your volleys are so much better. What were you doing? I was like, dude, Frank, I did not pick up a tennis racket this summer. He's like, so you played pickleball the whole summer? I was like, yeah. And then he was bought in. He plays now. We played. So anyway, that was very much the stigma of like, tennis players don't play this game. It's going to screw up your tennis game. Like, it's a dumb sport for old people. That sort of mentality, I think, was continued through 2020 when people tried it for the first time during COVID. In 2020, people started to actually like know what pickleball was. And then each year it's just grown faster and faster to the point where I think something that was really big for this sport was the announcement of those MLP celebrity owners. Any and every celebrity now has, whether it's pop culture, whether it's pro athletes, are owning a piece of these MLP teams. So I think that was really big for the legitimacy of pickleball. And the next thing that we're going to see is high school, college Olympics. 2032 Olympics, I believe, are in Australia somewhere or another. I just got in from Australia yesterday. Mm-hmm. They love it there. And I think it's a good chance that it would be in the 2032 Olympics, not in 2028 Los Angeles, but it'll be an NCAA sport. I think it'll be really cool because it'll be a co-ed sport as well that won't screw up any sort of Title IX requirements and whatnot for adding sports. Low-cost sport. So I think the next big step is high school, college, Olympics. And you're already seeing actual varsity programs. We had Jared Smith from Drury University who has scholarships available for his, it's not an NCAA sport, but they have a university-sanctioned team that offers pickleball scholarships. So it'll be an NCAA sport, it'll be a high school sport, and it'll be an Olympic sport. It'll just depend when that happens. So did I eventually end up answering your question?
Yeah, you got there for sure. Do you want to just talk, I know we'll probably talk about it again later, but just since you got back from Australia, do you want to go a little more in depth on what it's like overseas right now?
Yeah, certainly.
Just like watching that growth?
To me, it seems like Australia is actually, on a per capita basis, probably the second most developed. The third after probably Canada. I'm going to consider Canada, not the 51st state. I'm considering that North America.
Flip that right there.
Yeah, literally.
Flip that.
Yeah, there it is.
Says that it's the 51st state.
Not opposed. I'm not taking a stance. I'm not taking a stance on that. But I think they're the most developed other than the U.S. and Canada. And so I think we saw that from the PPA choosing to be there. And the people there were just excited to have American pros, top-level pros there. Super, super welcoming, super friendly. And I really hope that we do a bunch more to grow this game internationally. And the way that I'd say it is a lot of these international places are the exact same growth trends, the exact same place that we were 5 or 6 years ago. So I was able to see what pickleball was like in 2018. And I would say, Australia is like the U.S. in 2020, pre-COVID. And, some of these other places are U.S. 2017, but they're all following these same year-over-year growth rates. So the hockey stick is going to be hitting that sort of critical mass pretty soon here in a lot of these different places.
We kind of touched on where you see pickleball in 5 years. One thing I'm very interested in is as a lot of these PPA contracts and MLP contracts are expiring upcoming, what changes do you think that's going to bring to the tour? Incentives to play, say, PPA versus APP, where the payouts might be different. Just would be really curious to kind of hear your perspective of where you think a lot of the pros that are maybe say not top 30 are going to end up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a super interesting deal, right? And so you have to do a little bit of history on how we got this point and how our contracts are, how they're based. Right now, most of us are on a salary from the league that gets paid a percentage of that from each tournament you go to. So if you're paid $100,000 and you have 20 tournaments, they will pay you $5,000 per event that you go to, right? It's like almost completely appearance fees, which was phenomenal for securing a deal with a player during Tour Wars. Is it the ideal setup for a pro tour? Like, I don't think anybody thinks that it is, right? And so when we had Sameen on last week, 2027, when at the end of 2026, when most of these contracts are up, you're going to see, I think, a huge shift towards incentive-based pay. I think that we have a team league and we have an individual tour. I think that the team league is going to be salary-based, like team sports in the United States. The Brooklyn Nets pay their players X amount of dollars per year. Individual stuff, I think, should be highly incentive-based. Maybe there's a minimum floor that you have. You get, $1,500 for your travel, and then anything on top of that is just prize money. So I think for the good of the sport, I hope we shift to something like that. In terms of dollar amounts, I also think that we were probably inflated back in 2023 when Tour Wars happened. I mean, we were certainly inflated at that point. You see these metrics of MLP females are paid higher than WNBA. Respectfully, we don't deserve that. They're selling more tickets. They have maybe better viewership. An athlete in the WNBA, I think, is probably worth more than an athlete in the PPA for now, right? If these views continue to follow and our athletes get more views than a WNBA game, we deserve to be paid more, right?
Yeah.
But as of right now, we're overpaid for the amount of views that we get. If we continue to grow, maybe there isn't a substantial pay cut in 27.
Yeah, because one of the things, as just like I said, a viewer and someone who comes from golf, it's been really interesting comparing it to the PGA and LIV or even the European Tour versus the PGA Tour. At least European Tour still has, like I said, there's incentive for how you finish, but LIV Golf has essentially poached a lot of the top players, and they're still playing for money each week, but it's nothing in comparison to their overall contract.
Exactly.
Versus the PGA is still very much just you have to earn your own way. And now they still make tons of money, but it's also not the LIV money. So it's kind of just been interesting to compare the two, like I said, with my golf background. And that's kind of been one of the biggest issues I've had with the PPA structure. As you mentioned, the MLP, it is a team sport. That I do think, like I said, there's better comparisons to for how you keep some of the top players and how to keep them interested, especially with now a separate season, which will be in the summer. But for the PPA-wise, I really hope it does go back to an incentive-based structure, because the other thing with this too, and I know qualifiers, things are changing now for people outside the top 50 and so on, but I know if you are someone who has no status and qualifies in, and then even if you finish bronze, I think I've heard payouts 200 because it's half of what you're not signed. And it's okay, you're making nothing for even medaling, versus I know on the APP side, they at least pay out 12 spots. And if you're qualifying, I mean, you have to be there throughout the entire week, so your expenses are high. Now, obviously, I know the PPA is a lot with their contracts, and that's the whole end goal. But that's kind of be the interesting thing that I hope, like I said, as you mentioned, does change, where it's more incentive-based, higher payouts, and smaller contracts.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a good portion of why those players don't make much is, A, you have to pay your entry fees, and B, I think it's incentivizing from the PPA side you to sign on. And I think that the new contracts that they're doing are more incentive-based than previously. I'd be shocked if they weren't. But, I mean, I think it's probably just a negotiating tactic. Hey, look, you're a good player. We want you as part of the league. Sign. We'll give you full prize money. We'll give you X, Y, or Z. I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that we're going to be far more incentive-based in 2027. Yeah. But yeah, it's tough too, because those players, they want to make a name for themselves, but financially it doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense to play a PPA unless you do make an agreement with them, which probably does make sense.
So one of the things also I've been kind of really curious about, like I said, being from the viewer side and like talking with some pros and like I said, having the opportunity to talk to yourself, what's one thing that you think the pickleball viewer at home that is just a casual fan doesn't quite grasp that is going on actually in the pro game?
It's an interesting question. Are you talking like play-wise, behind the scenes-wise, like?
I'd say the first part of that question, definitely just from a viewership standpoint of actually what's going on the courts. And like I said, I know one thing that's always said is the ball seems way slower on TV than it is in person. I know that's always the easier one. But just like I said, from your own perspective, is there anything else that you think that the, like I said, average pickleball viewer at home just either isn't appreciating or just doesn't quite understand about the game?
Yeah, I mean that's the easiest one. Like, and it's probably the biggest one is it just doesn't look the same on TV. They're doing a better job of what I call using that like slash angle. It's like a 45-degree angle at the kitchen line, and sometimes those cameras are like coming in lower and whatnot. The lower you get to the action, the better you can actually see how fast it is. So I like it when they utilize that because you can actually see how fast it is. And then it doesn't look like something that you could do in your backyard, right? Yeah. Dinking is kind of the same. Like, dinking looks easy because we make it look easy, but the margins are so unbelievably thin on it. I was just playing with Deckel earlier, and Deckel's like, for those of you, I mean, I'm sure anybody who's listening to this probably knows who Deckel is. So Deckel's like 6'4". It's so freaking hard to hit a dink against Deckel because if you hit it too far, he's going to poke it out of the air. But on the other end, if you hit it too short, he's going to have time to take a big swing at it. So there's like this tiny little sweet spot of an inch or two over the net and 6 inches in space where you can hit it, where he can't just like do whatever he wants or speed it up. And I think that's something that sometimes is lost in TV is, yes, the kitchen is 7 feet, but the actual window that we can even hit a dink into is 3 inches over the net tops and 6 inches where it's either not too deep and not too short, but just right.
That's one thing as I've started getting into some more 5-0 games or playing against people that are much better than me, I noticed that even more on drops because you said you have those people that just have that extra reach. And I mean, I'm fairly tall too, so like I understand it, but just seeing that next level of what they can do with the ball and the angles, it's absolutely crazy that, like I said, I can't even imagine what that's like for someone like yourself or like I said, just the pro tour in general trying to play against week to week.
Yeah. So I just think to answer your question on the play side, just how difficult it is to dink effectively. Again, you know, maybe not like the sexiest answer, but on the behind the scenes answer to that question of like what's something that players or people watching might not know what's going on is just how much we actually like play, right? If you're watching a championship Sunday match, you know, Anna Lee has played 3 days in a row, 6 hours per day for the 29th weekend this year, right? Like it's that much is kind of wild. And, you know, we were fortunate to have like Austin Dillon, the NASCAR driver, come play with us at the lab. There are certainly people that have it like far worse, right? Like MLB, you're playing 160 out of 190 days. NBA, you've got, you know, 82 games over, you know, a good chunk of time. But like none of them are doing that for 6 hours a day, really, unless you're doing the 24 hours at Daytona or something. Like the mental grind of doing this 30 weekends a year, 6 hours a day for 4 hours or for 4 days in a row is like, that is as big of a skill to be able to stay mentally sharp through that all as your actual pickleball skills. That's equally as important, which I think that's something that people don't necessarily note enough is like, there are tournaments where people are just burnt out and play badly, and like, not because they're not trying. I've been there. Like, I've been at a tournament where I'm like giving it absolutely, like trying to force myself to play well and focus, and like just can't do it. Like, not through any lack of effort, but like, yeah, inability to lock in happens. So I think that's something behind the scenes that you know, people don't always see either.
One thing that's been really popular as of late, and one thing that I actually started bringing up on our podcast a couple weeks ago, Because it was a huge deal last year with the Vulcan ball that they signed this massive 1-year deal. And I don't know how much you can speak to this, so we can also pivot to a different type of conversation on this. But rumor is Franklin might be taking that over. And we saw some things on Twitter this past week that the X40 would not be good for the game. We've been hitting with a prototype, the FS Pro, I believe, from Franklin. Gets out around pretty quickly, but it plays fast. It might be faster than a Dura. So my question to you is, if you can comment on where the ball stands currently, I'd love to hear that. But if not, where's your stance on, is the ball too fast right now? Is it too slow? Would you rather see the paddles slow down, or would you rather see the ball slow down?
Yeah, so I'll just answer honestly. I actually just genuinely don't know what that is. I didn't talk to Connor about it. I don't know any information other than what's out there. But my stance is, I haven't hit with this new ball. I was really impressed with the old Franklin ball that we played with in Australia. So for a while, I think I've been probably a little too extreme on this, but I think that the best way to regulate the game is through the ball.
Completely agree with that.
Like paddles, trying to police the inside materials and deflection and exit velocity, you're never going to be able to do that on site at a tournament. So why don't we just attempt to police the ball? I thought that the points in Australia were really good, and we were using the old Franklin balls. Now, I think if it got a little bit warmer and the old Franklin ball, actually all balls are very, very dependent on weather, which is also something that we absolutely need to be factoring in. And you should never play the same ball, Red Rock when it's 40 degrees versus, Arizona in the middle of summer, or DC where it was like KC where it was 100 degrees.
And humid on top of it even.
In no way is that going to make competition look the same. I think slower ball is good. I thought it worked really well in Melbourne with the slow Franklin ball. But again, it was indoor fast conditions with a slow ball.
Yeah.
So if we were to play with that same ball here this weekend when it's going to be maybe mid-80s, I think it would probably be too slow. If you're playing with it indoors, I think it's a good ball given the state of paddles currently.
Are you saying this trip to Australia? You guys were using a Franklin?
Yep.
Last,
That's why
last
I didn't
week.
know that.
That's why there was a lot of even Fed comments on that. Of the X40 is not the ball to use.
I didn't realize that.
So I would say Fed's correct in certain circumstances, certain weather conditions. If it's hot, that ball is just the most miserable ball to play with. If it's indoor, I thought the points looked really good, and I thought it did a good job of neutralizing poppy paddles. You had more of those long, extended hands rallies like you had in 2022 that people loved. Now, you only get that on the women's side, and it's less and less because people are just putting the ball away earlier. On the men's side, you never really have, or super infrequently have, those hands battles that are more than 3 or 4 shots.
Yeah, I definitely think that X40 brings more of that 2020, 2021 pickleball. I've always been a big advocate for the Franklin, not in the summer. Like as I said, we are in Arizona and it gets way too hot. That is actually one where I'd prefer a Dura in the summer just because that ball softens up. But like a Dura in the past, in the winter, one, the ball's cracking like crazy, and two, it's with faster paddles and like I said, how fast that ball is, it's just not as fun. I personally really both of us actually are really big fans of the Vulcan V Pro flight. I thought that was a good in between. It'll be interesting, like I said, if this FS Pro is implemented, if they make any adjustments to it, similar to the Vulcan last year. But yeah, I was just curious to, like I said, hear your opinion on that.
I think we've gotten to a good spot with the Vulcan, to be honest. I was pretty critical of the first versions of it, and I think they deserved criticism.
For sure.
But now, my only criticism is it changes too much, right? I think a Vulcan ball, the current Vulcan ball for half a game is perfect. Once that outer sort of coat, I don't know if it is the actual coat.
Because it's glossy when it starts.
Once the gloss is gone, the ball really starts to play much slower. So it's a very different ball at the beginning of the game when it's glossy versus at the end of the game. I'm not having them go out around really every now and then, but I think it's a good ball now. The only problem is if you're an amateur, it just deteriorates quickly.
Yeah.
So
it deteriorates less than a Dura. That was one thing I think, at least from our experience, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, Dura breaks. So
that's
true. Yeah, it doesn't deteriorate, it just breaks.
Life, for my purposes, of a Vulcan to be very similar to the useful life of a Dura. A Dura, after 3 games, it's going to crack.
Yeah.
A Vulcan, after 3 games, it's just going to be too soft. So I'm throwing out a Vulcan or a Dura at the same pace, but a Dura you can go give to somebody else to play with that's not as picky as me.
Fair.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah, go for it.
The new Franklin ball, you're saying you feel like plays faster even than a Vulcan?
It definitely plays faster than the Vulcan. I'd put it up there with the Dura, if not even a little quicker. The thing I've been saying, which one of my friends said on another podcast on the Pickleball Effect, I've been calling it like a ping pong ball.
Wow.
Like it just bounces differently. Like it's interesting. It's like it's got a unique sound. The ball kicks up, it gets a lot of spin.
Okay.
They weren't cracking for me, but we also are in Arizona, we're playing indoors a lot, so we're in perfect conditions. So we haven't seen cracking. It definitely does get out around a little bit. First iteration, they sent it to us with the C45 paddles. We've used, I think, 3 of them so far, and it's a fast ball. It's
Is that comparing to a used Vulcan or a brand new Vulcan?
both, like even new.
I think that would be bad, to be frank. If it's faster than a Vulcan, I feel like a Vulcan is currently pushing the edge of how fast we should have a ball, given the current paddles. Then again, the Vulcan is probably one of the more weather-dependent balls and condition-dependent balls as well. The disparity of cold to warm with Vulcan affects how much it plays more than other balls like a Franklin even. But if it's faster than a Vulcan in normal conditions, I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I haven't ran speed tests on it, but if I were to compare it just off of my probably about 10 games we've used it, I would compare it more similar to a Dura than to the Vulcan. My 2 gripes with it so far is very strange bounces, and I don't know if it's because of it getting out of round, probably partially because of that, but the ball just kicks like crazy.
Yeah.
Like if you think bad bounces in terms of just the ball going out of rounds, like this ball will go out of rounds and jump sideways on you.
Sideways and up. It's like
I've never seen
up almost.
Yeah, like some of my top spin serves, I've never seen a ball kick up as much as it did. And
So
again,
it's just grabbing more. That's probably
what it seems like.
Like it's grabbing. You said it's spinnier, so it's grabbing the paddle more probably, and then it's grabbing the ground when it hits.
Yeah, that's what I'd assume.
So your top spin shots are really kicking upwards. You're probably getting jumps when somebody tosses a little bit of side spin on there, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's why I said if it gets that and it's landing on maybe a side that's, slightly a little bit deformed, it's like that you're going to get some weird bounces. So again, it might go through the Vulcan treatment of before they actually implement it, they might be running through this. But I mean, there was a lot of final production boxes. We'll see with that. More time to come.
Okay. That'll be interesting to see. That's for sure.
It was definitely interesting because your top spin would hit and then it would bounce up to my shoulder.
I've never seen a ball bounce
here.
That's crazy.
On a serve, and it's like...
That's why I'm like, in singles, I can't imagine this ball. Obviously doubles too, but like singles, I feel like you're just going to see some crazy kicks.
Yeah, it definitely moves fast because I was using a very soft control paddle that I am not very fond of, and the ball was moving faster than I have ever seen that paddle hit. So,
dang. Okay.
So pivoting, like I said, to some more general questions. Just what's one of your biggest like pickleball pet peeves or gripes?
Oh, biggest pickleball pet peeves. Oh man, I feel like I have a lot of them, but I'm bad at open-ended questions for the most part. Like my brain doesn't work that way.
I'll make sure to ask a lot more than in the future.
Like if you were to ask me like what's your favorite song, I'm like horrible at that. But like if you said recite all the lyrics to The Real Slim Shady, I'm on it. I don't know why. That's the way my brain works. So like pickleball pet peeves. I mean, there's simple ones like people who know better calling it a racket. Dude, you've been playing pickleball for 4 years. You know that it's not a racket. Stop calling it a racket.
I saw a recent one with paddle taps.
Paddle taps? Yeah. I mean, like Will Howells put it out there today that
I saw that tweet. Yeah.
Some people paddle tap too aggressively.
Always someone with a gearbox.
Well, see, here's the thing. That's what I said. That's why I said it's always a gearbox person because like the gearbox. That paddle's like indestructible. You could throw it across. Yeah. You could throw it as far as you want, and it's still gonna be good. But like everybody else is like, hey, let's take it easy. But the gearbox guys are always like, yeah, great shot. Like that doesn't bother me nearly as much.
Last night, someone looked at me and they were like, "Oh, you don't do the paddle tap thing?" And I was like, I didn't want to be like, well, because I don't enjoy getting smacked.
You know the interesting thing, and it's something I picked up on. I didn't even realize it until a couple weeks ago, but I'm defaulting to the hand now.
Yeah.
Not for looking for a high five, but it's like they put out their paddle, I do the high five to the paddle. Because I see that on the pro scene a lot, and I didn't realize where I picked it up from. And I realized because a lot of people like look at that and they don't know what I'm doing, and I'm like, oh shoot. Like this, I understand. I'm like, I didn't realize why I was doing it, but it's 100% also like paddle testing a lot of new paddles. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to get a ding right in the middle of the face of some of these people. So
I don't know what I think I do. I think when I'm in like real matches, I'm all about like the high fives and
Yeah.
stuff. So I don't know how much I do paddle taps. I think I go for the hand, but that was something that we just did in college tennis too. Like
exactly.
you're always giving your partner a high five between points. I'm sure I have a bunch more pet peeves, but just nothing that I can think of off the top of my head.
If you could change one rule this year, what would you change?
Bring back the chainsaw. Next question.
Yeah, I knew that.
Come on. That's too easy.
Do you think bringing back that serve would be good for the game?
I think that serve did not have proper actual discussion of getting it banned. All I want and all I wanted was to have a conversation based on facts about the chainsaw, which we did not have. We banned the chainsaw using completely incorrect assumptions. In some of the USAP, in the proposal to change the rule back in 2021, they said that it's proposed to get rid of the chainsaw serve, which bounces unpredictably when it hits the ground, which we can't actually have a real conversation about getting rid of it when you have the premise completely incorrect. Like, the chainsaw and the spin serve is completely 100% readable every single time. If I spin it this way, there was not a single chainsaw serve or spin serve that I saw that I could not accurately predict where it's going to go. Am I just God? Or did I see something?
Yeah.
So I wish that we had the conversation of banning the spin serve with all correct facts.
Okay.
I would love to rehash the conversation, and then if we say that this is not good for the game, I'll completely let that go. But we can't even start the conversation if you're going to say that the ball bounces unpredictably. Like, that's a non-starter for having an actual debate about the serve.
I'm not saying I fully disagree with you, but the two counters I would have to that is one, I know with ping pong, obviously, that's why you have to have an open hand so you can't put any spin on it because it'd be a little bit easier probably to conceal in table tennis. The other one is I saw from, I think, a first-person perspective of a mutual friend of ours receiving your Zane serve, and I cannot imagine having to return that.
Yeah, but here's the thing, like, I was the only one that came to this argument with actual numbers. The first time you were going to see my chainsaw serve, you were going to miss returns about 40% of the time. The second time was 25%, and the third time was 10%. The average amount of missed returns before spin serve was 8%. So by the time you actually have seen this a few times and you figure it out, you're not missing the return much more than average, slightly more than average. Now, the big thing was like they're hitting safer returns to try and get them in the court, but it wasn't breaking the game once people figured it out. I could train you to be able to return that serve because you'll see what I'm doing with my hands and you'll know how much it's going to bounce in which direction. It looks brutal, especially when I'm out there like doing it at in between matches at Beer City and making
I saw that clip too.
Amateurs look like they've never picked up a paddle before, but once you know what's going on, you can return it at the average amount of makes.
One question I want to stick on because I have a follow-up for just staying on the subject of serving. One thing I noticed last year, and I just want to get your perspective on this, is the constant change to the serve rule. And I know you have some opinions on this. I know after, I think it was Fawn Blue, which is actually one of the first times we had met, of Deckel's serve, of challenging people to find a clip and you would pay them out through, I think, Venmo if you could find where his serve was actually illegal, because I think he got a lot of challenges that week. The broader question where I'm kind of coming from is, I was at Kansas City MLP, and that week was one where in MLP, you could serve it tossing the ball up, and at PPA, you had to do the just dropping the ball. How difficult is that, or how frustrating is that from the pros perspective or pro side of where obviously you guys have repetition countless times, practicing serve, kind of getting in a routine, and then having one tour, which, like I said, I mean, technically both are the same, but a different set of rules between the two of how does that affect your mindset going into the week, and also just frustrations wise of how to practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the players at least are pretty adaptable to how you're going to serve for a given week. I think that, the main issue, I can serve from here, I can serve from here. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You hit reps for a few days and you're going to be pretty dialed in on it. The issue is how it's enforced. So Kansas City, as you mentioned, the rule at Kansas City was changed mid-tournament. But again, I think you have to look back at what is the actual objective. There are two potential problems with the serve. Problem 1 is that the current serve rules are unenforceable. Problem 2 is that the serve is too big of a problem. People conflate them together. People conflate the fact that referees can't enforce it with the serve being too powerful. Those are two very, very distinct problems, and if they're conflated, then you can't actually solve either of them. Let's take, are the serve rules enforceable as one problem? Current serve rules are not enforceable whatsoever. Like, the current serve rules are you have to drop the ball from below your, I think, hip, waist, which is now defined as the top part of your hip,
which is different on every person.
You can't have more, this is literally in the rules, you can't have more than one ball length of upward motion during your toss. You have to be swinging at an upward angle, and the top part of your paddle has to be below the level of your wrist.
You can't see that.
You can't see, none of those things are things that you can even debate, like, in slow motion. There's no way that a referee can call that, right? So all of that is, the serve rules, completely unenforceable, especially when referees are trained to say you have to be 100% sure in order to call a fault. So how do we fix this? 1, you can go to the drop serve. Eliminate all problems there. I think that's a great solution. I think that's the easiest solution, right? There's no subjectivity with any of the rules with the drop serve. I guess the only subjectivity is the person throwing it down or throwing it up, but that's an easy enough thing for a referee to watch. That's one solution to that. The other solution is you change the burden of proof on the rule. So rather than, imagine an MLB umpire saying, it's a ball unless I'm 100% sure that it's a strike. No, they use their judgment every time. So we can change the burden of proof on an illegal serve to referee judgment of more likely than not. This serve was more likely than not to be illegal, rather than I have to be 100% sure to call this illegal. They're still policing multiple different subjective rules, but you can change the standard of proof. The other thing, like, are big serves a problem? I think we need data on it. I personally don't think so.
I'm with you on this too. I don't think it should be, I think it's an overblown issue.
Yeah, I mean, like, if somebody develops a big serve, good for them. Like, I think that's a part of the game, and I don't think that serves are taking over. Perfect example is, like, look at Federico. If Federico takes these unbelievable serves and returns them incredibly well in singles, like, every single time, like, he's just good at returning, and he's playing against the best servers consistently. Like, if he can do it, we all need to figure it out. So the real problem is when those two issues get conflated. We can't enforce the serve rule, and serves are too big. They've been merged together, which is why we see, like, this release from at a 45-degree angle, blah, 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 that I can't even keep up with. So anyway, sorry, but the serve rule is something for a long time I've been passionate about, because I think that we're making some
because they banned your chainsaw.
They banned the chainsaw, but
they got on your bad side early.
But I think that you're not actually looking at I don't think we're actually looking at
the numbers,
the problem, the numbers, what we're actually trying to solve for. We're just trying to put, like, patch jobs and hope it solves the problem. We're throwing darts at a dartboard and, like, maybe this will fix
trying to solve a problem. We don't know what the actual problem is.
We don't know if it's a problem, and we're also having solutions that don't fix the problem.
Yeah, because the one thing I've noticed from court dimensions that I've been playing on at indoor facilities, and also even watching Desert Ridge, which obviously this week we're not here because we moved to Tucson. But one thing I remember that was complaining about that facility is there wasn't a ton of room. And the only thing I would agree on with big serves is you have to be able to back up a little bit. And so if you're limited on space, I would say big serves are an issue. But that's an easy fix, I would say, especially future-proofing. I think that's part of the game. Like, I know I'm often one saying the game is also getting too quick. Like I said, either the ball needs to get softer or the paddles need to be scaled back. But on the flip side of that, I'm 100% with you. It's like big serves are a part of the game. It's like you need to be able to adapt to that.
Yeah, but to your point, like, let's take Desert Ridge for an example. Like, it's a good example that people like to use for big serves you can't return properly. All right, let's say we nerf the serve, right? Let's say we input that line that they were thinking of that's 4 feet inside the court. Let's say it's implemented. Now the returner, you're not in the fence anymore.
Nope.
But what happens? You are now hitting much better returns. You're pushing the serving team into the fence with your deep return. None of these things can be taken in a vacuum. You nerf the serve, what happens? Okay, you make it so much more difficult to win points on your serve.
Yeah. Third shot drops become significantly
third shot
harder.
drops become way harder. If you were to do that, you're pushing the server who's already at a statistical disadvantage into the fence instead.
When you nerf the return, nerf the third shot.
Yeah, just nerf everything.
One at a time.
You just started the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
Just use an X40.
It's just kitchen
Again,
singles.
these things all have downstream ramifications.
Yeah.
Like you can't nerf the serve without thinking through the impact of what else happens as a result of that. Why? So here's a good question. Why are people taking more risks with their serves to begin with?
Yeah.
It's because it's getting so hard to get to the kitchen, right? People's returns are good and people's fourths, more than anything, are very good.
Yep.
They're reaching in or they're letting it bounce and smack the ball afterwards. We're only taking risk on our serve because the fourths have gotten so good.
Yep.
We're hitting our serves harder because it's harder to get to the kitchen.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Go for the fun. Yeah.
last questions then. Just a quick run through. I don't want you to fully explain every single thing because
That's good context.
gonna go. That's why I don't want
You
it.
got me on the soapbox.
If
with
we
the
go,
subject and
that's what
stuff.
I'm saying.
It's a long question. So
If we go long-winded answer, it's gonna be hard. But what's your number one tip for each level? So just go through 3.0, 3.5s, and
Okay.
that's why it's not a long. Because if it's
Gotcha.
long, we're gonna be here for a while.
Beginner, somebody who's never played before, just get out there. Pickleball people are super eager to show you the basics.
boy, that's true.
3.0, yeah, probably a little bit too eager.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, guy, chill. 3.0 is going to be getting ready position ingrained into your muscle memory. A good ready position. Because that's a habit that's really difficult to unbreak. 3.0 is ready position. 3.5, I would say, is either simplifying your dinking technique, really working on having a very compact dinking technique, or doing the same with your third shot drop. Whatever you don't do at 3.5, I would say that's your 4.0 goal. But at some point in that 3.5, 4.0, you have to develop a drop. A lot of players come in tennis-wise and just start banging. Great. Don't ever lose that, but you got to develop a drop at some point. 4.5, I would say.
This is us.
4.5, I would say it is really taking space away from your opponents by taking the ball out of the air. Looking for volley first instinct at 4.5 is really important because you can then sort of dictate the point. You're then able, if you're taking volleys from here, you can dink volley or you can speed up. I'd say 5.0. 5.0 is probably the same, but with more of an emphasis on the +1 shot, more of an emphasis on I've flicked, they've countered, I need to put that next one away, and anything 5.5 and above is all hand speed.
Cool.
That was decently concise.
That was
was-
good.
like
That was
that's-
very concise.
That was very concise. The very
How
last.
concise would it have been if I didn't preface it?
I wouldn't have probably wanted to get into too much detail on that because that could be an hour-long answer.
Yeah, for sure.
I could filibuster Congress with that one.
Heck yeah. Now, the last question I want to ask, and unfortunately I don't have my iPad, so I know you played with him. We're going to have to go off memory here, but
Oh no.
rate a Mr. Jack Selby on his what you think his duper is, and I'll put some clips that I have of him.
See, I feel like he probably doesn't have a duper, so that's the
He
thing.
definitely doesn't.
I feel like he doesn't have a duper. I'd put him duper 4.0, I think. Duper 4.0.
Might be a bit high.
I think that's probably about
I was
right.
gonna
That's
say
probably right. It's probably right.
3.75 to 4.0.
All you
think.
need to say is Andrew Cochet has a higher duper than Jack Selby. That's
Okay.
all I need you to say.
Andrew Cochet has a higher, is that how you say his last name?
Cochet.
Cochet. Andrew Cochet, higher duper than Jack Selby. Everybody knows it.
No one's gonna understand this except a very few people, but I appreciate that.
The more niche, the better. You're
Oh,
really going to
100%.
want to win over that one person that knows what you're talking about. You hit it with the really obscure meme, they're
Oh,
like a
100%.
fan for life.
100%. But anyways, I appreciate your time.
Yes,
Like I
thank
said, hope to do this again, and good luck this week.
Yeah, definitely. Anytime. I appreciate you guys. This is a fun one.